Okay, looks like I'm live. So, I actually used up all of my dad jokes in the last section, so I know you're probably very bummed about that. So instead, for the warm-up this time, I was going to read some limericks. These are funny limericks that were written in the 1840s by a man named Edward Lear. So they're funny, remember that. There was an old man with a flute, a serpent ran into his boot. But he played day and night till the serpent took flight and avoided that man with the flute. It's funny. Here's another one. There was an old man of Peru who never knew what he should do. So he tore off his hair and behaved like a bear, that intrinsic old man of Peru. It's funny. See? One more. This one, another funny one. Here we go. There was an old man of the Isles, whose face was pervaded with smiles. He sung a high-hum diddle and played on the fiddle, that amiable man of the Isles. Okay, now that you are nice and entertained by those obviously very funny limericks, we can go to our session. Just a sec. Get to the right spot. Okay, we are going to be talking about tips and tricks for editing in CoughDrop. So welcome everybody. Thank you for giving me some time. I'm going to be walking through some functionality inside of CoughDrop. As I do, if you have any questions as we go, feel free to just post them in chat, and I will address them as we go forward. People usually have specific questions. Don't feel silly if you think it's a silly question, because if nobody asks any questions, then this is going to be a very short, relatively short session. I have some good stuff to cover, but I like to make sure I'm hitting what people actually want to see. So don't be afraid to ask about stuff. So as far as a little bit of background, so my name is Brian Whitmer. I started CoughDrop back in 2014. My graduate research in school was human-computer interaction, which is the science or the technology of people interfacing with technology. So it's things like how do you make a screen that isn't confusing, and how do you make buttons that make sense to people, and where do you put things, and how do you organize your displays so that it's intuitive and straightforward. So out of school, I started a company called Instructure, and we made Canvas, which is a learning system that's used by schools, universities, and school districts around the country and around the world. There's over 15 million users of Canvas, which is great. It's awesome. The company got really big, and I started looking at where I thought I could keep making a difference and what I could do next. And I ended up starting CoughDrop, mostly because of my experiences with my oldest daughter, Becca, who is now 10 years old. Becca has Rett syndrome, so she is nonverbal. She's in a wheelchair. She doesn't have good motor control, and she has a lot of things going against her as far as communication goes. As we started to really work on communication with her, as we I guess finally took the hint how much she wanted to communicate, and tried to start to build up a framework around her that could support her and help her grow, we kind of scrambled as far as the technology went. I looked at everything, tried to take a crash course in AAC, tried to really be able to understand the augmentative communication space and what was going on and where things were headed and the tools that were out there. I really felt like there was room for improvement on the technology side. So I started talking to speech paths and OTs and assistive technology specialists around the country. And I'd say, tell me about AAC. You've been doing this way longer than I have. What do you like and what do you hate? What do you wish was different? What do you think is the future? Where do you think things should be going? I'd show them some of my ideas for stuff I thought we could change, and we worked together to build what has now become the CoughDrop app. So a little bit about CoughDrop, what makes it different or what makes it valuable, why we decided to add yet another AAC system to the already busy world of a large list of AAC apps, because it's cloud-based. Everything about CoughDrop is built to support the idea that the vocabulary and the communication strategy for an individual does not stay on a single device. It can run on whatever devices it needs to, and it can be flexible or fluid enough to run where the communicator needs it. So if the device breaks, you don't have to worry about losing access. If you need to pull up a different device, if you want to make changes, you don't have to do that on the communicator's device. It just makes a lot of things easier and more approachable. CoughDrop is cross-platform, so it'll run on iOS or Android or Amazon Kindle or on a Windows computer or anything with a web browser. There's a bunch of built-in reports. We had just had a session where we talked about the data tracking and goal setting pieces of CoughDrop, so you can watch that session if you want to do a deep dive about that. But there's a lot of functionality that's available inside of the system that can help support not just the communicator, but the team around the communicator, to make it easier for people to have a good cohesive strategy as they work with a communicator, to be able to reinforce and model and do some really effective language stimulation and support the team that is trying to support the communicator. So that's a lot of the focus of CoughDrop and the resources that are available. It's a great communication app. There's some very robust vocabulary sets in there. There's lots of templates that you can use and start from, but it's built in mind. We call it team-based AAC because a lot of it is around trying to support and encourage the team to collaborate. So that's it as far as the PowerPoint slides go. I'm going to jump in because what we're going to talk about here is, there's my limericks. We're going to talk about the editing interface inside of CoughDrop, how we can make changes, the tools that are available to be able to support communication strategy for communicators and for the team inside of the CoughDrop system. So when you first log into CoughDrop, if you're new to CoughDrop, this is the supervisor's dashboard. There's two types of users in CoughDrop. There's communicators and there's supervisors. And supervisors are people like therapists or family members or caregivers or teachers, and they have access to the boards and the data reports, if they're turned on, of the communicators they're working with. So I'm working with two people, my daughter, Becca, and then a test account. So I can jump into their boards, I can make changes, I can program things as much as I need to help and support the communicators that I'm working with. So that can provide a lot of value because I can do this from whatever device I'm on. I don't have to take away the communicator's device. So when someone says, let's add a couple boards or let's add a couple buttons, some new words, I don't have to say, well, I'm going to be there on rotation next week and then I can make the changes. Or I don't have to say, well, leave it with me overnight and I'll program it and then I can give it back in the morning. That's a terrible thing to have to say. Don't speak all night and I'll give you your voice back in the morning, because I'll add a couple new words for you. So we tried to prevent those things from happening. So supervisors, there's two types of supervisors. There's read-only and editing supervisors. But if you add an editing supervisor, then they can make changes to the boards for the communicators that they're working with. So they can program and make changes and modify as much as they need to without having to take the device away from the communicator. The other nice thing about being able to do it remotely is that you can program it from a computer, which maybe sounds like, okay, yeah, so what? But it makes such a huge difference. If you've ever tried to program somebody's board on a device with just a touch screen and you've got a keyboard sliding up and down, and you've got pop-ups moving around, it just gets really busy and really overwhelming, and they just take a lot longer than they should. And you can do it on CoughDrop. You can program on the device, and sometimes that's what you need to do, and so we try to make it as easy as we can. But at the end of the day, if you're doing some hardcore programming, it's going to be a lot easier and a lot faster to do it on a computer than it is going to be to do it on a tablet. So if you have a board that you're working with, you just come in and you hit edit, and then you can make changes to the board. So you can change just about anything to do with any of the boards inside of CoughDrop. So you can drag and drop to rearrange the pictures if you want to move them around. You can click on any button to get at a more detailed list of the settings that are available. So by default, when you first sign up for CoughDrop, whenever you edit a button, it'll pull up these quick links. These are the most common things that people want to do with a button. So you can just quickly tap on any of those to be able to change the picture or change what it says or link to another board, all those sort of things. You can also drill into all of the settings that are available. So you can change the label, which is the text that's shown. You can change what word type it is. So the system automatically tracks parts of speech. So if you've got a word that's a verb or a negation, or it didn't classify it quite right, you can reprogram it to whatever you want. You can change the border and the fill style. There's a lot of options as far as the picture goes. So when you search for pictures inside of CoughDrop, by default, what we show is a bunch of images from a library called Open Symbols. If you go to opensymbols.org, all of these images are available, and they're actually all freely licensed. So they're all Creative Commons licensed, which means that you don't have to worry about somebody suing you if you use the images. As long as you provide attribution, they're free for you to use as much as you want to. So you can put them on printed materials, you can put them up in your classroom, you can put them on your, your school website or your program's website, and you don't have to worry as much as you would with some of the other symbol libraries. Now, if you have access to one of those symbol libraries, you can always upload images or even drag and drop pictures, and I'll show that here in a minute, from BoardMaker Online or Symbol Sticks or whatever other library you're using. We also actually, so in addition to those open symbols, there's a bunch of other libraries you can search through. So you can check Flickr Creative Commons and see if there's a good photo there. There's some public domain images you can search. Pixabay is a large library of public domain images. You can search, if you have a sign language communicator that you're working with, you can actually search for signs. So these are going to be animated GIFs that are related to whatever the word is. So you can actually pull in animated GIFs, which will be animated when they're played for the individual communicator, so they can actually get some some video modeling essentially of the signs that they are using on their augmentative system. So that can be a nice valuable thing depending on who you're working with. And you can also, if you have access to a LessonPix account, I don't have, looks like I'm not connected to it, but if you connect your account to LessonPix, then you can search and embed images from the LessonPix library into your board sets. And you can actually do that as a batch process as well, which I'll show you in a minute. But there's lots of options for images, or you can take a picture from the camera or upload an image from your computer. I'm going to pause for just a second. Are there any questions so far as we go through? Okay. The other thing you can do, if you have on your computer or on a website, if you have an image library that you like, so let's say, for example, you on Google image search, you find something you like. So let's see what's a good, let's say that I want to find a really good cake. That's the picture that I want to use, is a great cake. This looks pretty good. This looks like delicious cake. I can actually just drag and drop the picture into CoughDrop, and it will automatically upload it and use the picture. Or if you don't, if you are using like a clip art library or something on your computer, you can say, I'm going to copy this image, and then you can paste the image, and it will use that picture as well. So it's really easy to grab pictures wherever they're at and use the symbols or the images that will work for the individual communicator. There's a question about devices. Somebody asked, can you use CoughDrop on any device? That's correct. It'll work on, well, you said iPod. I'm trying to remember. I think it's iOS 7 is the oldest that it goes. You could try to pull it up in Safari on an older device, and sometimes it'll work. But usually you have to be a little bit careful with some of the older devices. But iPhones and iPads and Android tablets and Android phones and Kindles, those will all work just fine for CoughDrop. So you can use the picture that you want. It's really easy to use an image of whatever you want. You can also, if you go to the Action tab, there's lots of options for what buttons do. So by default, they're just going to speak, right? But we can also have them linked to another board. This is how you can create folders and different levels to the system. So if you have a board that you already created, that you, let's say, for example, we had a feelings board. Oops. That we knew we wanted to use. We can search for that and find it, and we can drop it in. Or we can just create a brand new board that we'll then link to and use instead of finding one that already exists. So you can do either way. You can actually open links to websites. So if you paste a YouTube link in here, then it will automatically pop up and play the video when they hit the button. Or if you paste in a Tar Heel Reader link, then it will actually pop up and play the Tar Heel book for the communicator right here inside the system. In fact, let's go ahead and do that real quick so you can see what that looks like. Did I break Tar Heel Reader? There we go.
How to make pizza.
So let's say this is the book that we want to use. So I can paste the link in, and CoughDrop will automatically grab. It looks like something's going on with the Tar Heel website right now, but it'll grab an image from the book that you can use for the picture on the button, and then there's settings here, so you can say automatically read or don't read the pages until it's launched. You can have it speak the buttons or not. You can change the size of the links. You can change the background color, and then when you hit this button, it'll launch Tar Heel Reader inside of CoughDrop with whatever settings you put in. You can also, we have some third-party integrations, which I'm not going to talk about right now, but there's actually some options for other integrations that you can put in for other little tools and utilities as well. So there's lots of options for what the buttons can do when you hit them. In addition to that, you can change what's said. So right now this button says want, but let's say, for example, that when you hit it, I wanted to say, I want to go home. So the speech doesn't match what the button label says, but that's fine. You can have it say whatever you want to. Or you can record audio or upload audio, or you can browse through audio that's already been recorded. We actually have a pretty robust message banking library that's built into CoughDrop, and I will show that here in just a little bit. I'll show a little bit about it so you can get an idea of what's available there. But there's a lot of resources that are available here to be able to make it easy to use audio, whether it's just text-to-speech or recorded audio files for each button inside of the system. So there's lots of settings you can use. Let's go ahead and just create a brand new board so you can see what that looks like. So when you're in CoughDrop and you go to the dashboard, on any screen inside of CoughDrop, you can just hit the menu and say, let's create a new board. You give it a name, so let's call this the weather board. So let's say I can say it's for me, or I can say it's for one of the people I'm working with. So if I want to connect it to one of their accounts, I can do that as well. I can just put it wherever it needs to be, wherever makes the most sense. You set a size, so let's say we're going to make ours 3x4, and then you can specify, do you want the board to be public, which means that it's part of the public library, anybody can search for it and find it, or private, in which case nobody has access to it unless you share it with them. There's a bunch of additional options as well, so you can pick an icon if you want to, or it'll automatically pick one for you. You can specify a license if you're making it public. You can specify what language it is, because we have some language tools that are built into the system, and then some other options as well. But let's go ahead and just hit create. And then we can start building a board. So this is the weather board. So let's say we have some words like windy, sunny, rainy, hot, cold. So as you can see, the system is automatically grabbing images and applying them to the boards. Now the system's flexible enough that you can change those as much as you want to. So you can use the image libraries like I showed you before. You can do a Google search and find the picture that you think will work best, however you want to do it. So let's say, for example, that we want photos. We need some photorealism for this communicator. Then we can just drag and drop. Oops, I missed. Oh, there we go. Just took a minute. We can drag and drop, and it will use that image instead of the one that was built in. So you can very quickly use the images that will work best for the communicator, wherever you may find them. When you're building boards, this painting tool is actually really valuable. So there are a bunch of different parts of speech that by default the system uses Fitzgerald key for colors. So these are all describing words that are automatically blue. But if you decide you don't like that, or you have another coloring scheme in mind, you can just hit paint, pick a color, and then as you drag around, it will paint those colors, which can be nice for coloring, but it's also nice for this other option down here where I can say, let's go ahead and hide some buttons. So let's say we've created a board, we've put all the vocabulary in we want, but we're not ready to use it all yet. So we're going to turn off these buttons temporarily. And then when we're ready to use them, then we can just hit show. We can paint and show them, and it will turn them back on. That way it's really easy to be able to create a board that has all of the vocabulary you need without having to have it all up front. There's sort of two strategies that people generally use when they're talking about growing into a vocabulary. The one is to say, let's just have a couple large buttons, well, good large targets, and for some basic communication solutions, and then we can add some rows and columns as we go. CoughDrop will accommodate that, so you can always come into the grid and say, let's add some columns. Let's add some rows, or let's remove some rows. So you can tweak it as much as you need to, even after it's been built. the other strategy is to say, let's build a vocabulary set that we're going to get to eventually. This is what a lot of experts will encourage you to do, is sort of begin with the end in mind and say, let's have a good large vocabulary system that has all the words that we're going to need, has their places for them, because then the benefit is that the communicator can get at a good consistent motor plan, which means that as they start to use the system, they can learn where the buttons are, and that's not going to change. We're not going to add and remove rows and columns on them, so the buttons aren't going to move around as their vocabulary expands. It's just it'll just be some blank spots that then later get unblanked when we're ready for them. That way you can have a good consistent strategy. You can start with the end in mind and then grow into the vocabulary set over time as the communicator gets more and more proficient and more ready for these additional resources. So those are some of the basics of creating and modifying boards inside of CoughDrop. I'm going to pause again and check and see if there's any questions that we have so far. If you have one, feel free to post it. Okay, the next thing I'm going to talk about is some of the additional utilities that we have inside of CoughDrop to make editing a little bit easier or a little bit more approachable. So when you're in a board, there's some quick shortcuts that you can use. If you, not in edit mode, but if you just hit more and go to board details, then there'll be some resources and information here that could be really valuable. So you can see some basic information about the board. You can actually get a list of all of the buttons that are available from this board. So for example, if we're on a large core vocabulary set and we come to board details, we can see there's about 1,000 words that are available from this board, from this main screen, based on all the folders that are connected to it. So I can get a list of all of those words. So I can very quickly check and see if there's any repeats, if there's any words that I'm missing. I can download the list as a CSV file. I can actually just filter by repeats and see if there's any. Most of the repeats you'll see here are because we have, the way this board set is created, we have linked buttons that then link to a non-linked version of the button. So it'll show it twice, but only once is really for communication, which is fine. But when you go into details, there's that information. You can actually see the whole hierarchy and see all the boards that are connected, so you can really quickly get a feel for what's going on. And if it's a board that you've created, like the one that we were just on, or that you have edit access to, then there's a couple additional options that you can do. So you could say translate this board, which is a very quick way to be able to batch translate the board set into another language. So let's say, for example, that we want to translate this board set into French. We can either switch it, so we can say when we translate, let's also make that the default language, or we can just translate it, which is what I'm going to do, without switching the actual words. And I'll show you why here in just a minute. But if I hit start translation, then what it's going to do is pull up a translation list. So it'll say, here's all the words in English, here's the translations that we found. It's just using Google Translate for the translation piece. But if you accept that, then it'll go ahead and map those, and it'll remember those translations. Then what we can do when we're in speak mode, I can actually just switch back and forth between English and French. So I can say, all right, now real quick, let's switch to French. And the boards will change. I can also say, let's switch to French for the text, but when I hit the buttons, we'll have it speak it in English. So if you have somebody that's reading French, but you want to speak in English,
windy, sunny,
you can accommodate that as well. So that translation feature can be kind of nice for that option. In addition to that, oops. If you have a board set that you've used and you want to change all of the images or all the resources for it all at once, you can hit swap images, and you can say, instead of using the images that are here, let's go ahead and use a different library. So let's only use images from the Noun project, for example, which is a bunch of black and white images. Or if you have a Lesson Pix license, and you can say, let's go ahead and change all these to Lesson Pix symbols. And it will automatically go through and change them all at once into whatever library it is that you specify. That can be nice for some sort of batch tweaking and changing. The other thing you can do here is you can actually record messages. So if you have created a vocabulary set that is essentially a message banking vocabulary set, and you want to record some phrases, it's really easy to do that all at once inside a CoughDrop. You just hit more, and under details you say record messages, and then you can drill into each board inside a vocabulary set and record each phrase one at a time. So you just hit record, hit stop, and then hit the next phrase, and the next phrase, and the next phrase, and you can just go through and quickly make recordings for all of the buttons inside of the system. And then it will automatically update that, and you'll have all of those resources there with audio files instead of with the text-to-speech system. I think it's like there's a couple questions here. Okay, there's a question around, do you have a large number of public shared boards for people to start from? So inside of CoughDrop, we have a bunch of templates that have been created by the community or with collaboration in the community. So these Quick Core is a set of 3 vocabulary sets that are very robust. It's sort of a motor planning style vocabulary set if you're familiar with some of the other vocabulary sets like that. But then we also have some that are more category based. Or there, for example, Communicate is one that was created by a woman out of the UK, and it's very lifestyle, functional sort of a communication style. There's a hospital resource, and you can always just search and see what boards are available. So there's lots of basic single boards that have been created by teachers for classroom lesson plans and things that you can search through and just drop in and include in the Communicator's vocabulary set. So there's lots of options there as well. Someone asked if anyone has access to modified boards. There's 2 types of supervisors inside of CoughDrop. So basically what happens is when people sign up, when a communicator signs up, and by the way, I told you before there's 2 types of accounts. There's communicator accounts and supervisor accounts. Communicator accounts are what you pay for, and supervisor accounts are free. So a communicator, when they sign up, then they connect their account to all the supervisors they're going to be working with. And that could be their parents or their teachers or their caregivers or the speech therapist. They essentially friend them. They add them as supervisors to their account. And when they do that, they can specify if it's a read-only connection or an editing connection. So only people that have permission to edit boards will be able to make changes. Now, we actually keep a history of all of the changes that are made to a board. So if this is a communicator's board, we can always go in and look at the history of all of the changes that have been made to that board over time. So we can see when it was changed, and we can very quickly roll back just in case there were any problems with a change. So if somebody goes in and does something nutso, we can quickly say, okay, let's just go back to yesterday and get rid of all that weird thing that happened. Maybe somebody accidentally translated it into Afrikaans, and we're like, I don't really know what this means anymore. We can just quickly roll back any of those kinds of changes. As far as so somebody asked about people being able to edit on top of each other. So since we keep a history of all the changes, we can merge any changes that happen. So if people are editing on top of each other, in general, it doesn't happen very often at all. When people are making changes, usually someone's sort of taking point on the things that they're going to modify. But when you're on your dashboard, one of the things that you'll see is this notification section will show you all of the times people change boards for the people that you're working with. So if you're supervising 2 people and somebody modifies one of their boards, you'll see a note here that says this board was changed by this person. And then you can go look at the history, and you can go look and see what happened and make sure that something weird didn't happen. So everybody can see what changes were made. So if there is some kind of conflict that happens, you can resolve it yourself, or you can reach out to us, and we'd be happy to tweak things as much as we need to. All right, so those are the basics as far as being able to create and modify boards for communicators. So as you're making changes to boards, there are, like I said before, there are some templates that are available. These Quick Core templates that I'm showing you right now This is a set of vocabulary sets that we created in collaboration with some speech therapists. It's based on a combination of different core vocabulary sets, and there's actually a lot of good vocabulary in here, and it's a good system that can grow with the communicator depending on what level they're at. There's a lot of spaces to add additional words in these vocabulary sets. So if there's fringe vocabulary or additional words or phrases that need to be added, there's good places to be able to do that inside of these quick core board sets, but they're also just very good and robust on their own. So you can take any of these and you can make changes to them as much as you want to. So when you're working with a communicator, if you want to personalize it for the communicator, you can just say, let's make a copy of this board set, and you pick who it's for. So for example, let's say I wanted to make a copy of this for my daughter, and then I can say whether or not I want it to be public or private. I can translate it right here in one step, and then I can copy just this board. So if I wanted to just the main board and keep everything else pointing to the originals, I can do that. Or I can say, let's copy the whole board set, everything inside of this. I want to make brand new copies of all of them for my daughter. Then when I do that, it'll automatically copy whatever it is that I've specified, and then I can make as many changes as I need to, and I can personalize it and tweak it as much as I want to. So these vocabulary sets that we've created, they, just like any robust vocabulary set, it takes a little bit of practice and a little bit of really reinforcement before the support team is going to get proficient with it as well. So we encourage people to create activities and to do some sort of self-training to practice how you would say things before you sit down in front of a communicator. Because just like with any robust vocabulary set, some of the things will make sense to you and some of them may not. But with some practice, you'll find that there's a lot of good vocabulary that's there that can accommodate the needs of the communicators where they're at. I'll show a couple additional board sets just so you can sort of see some of the differences. Some systems have very strong opinions about the right and the wrong way to do things, or how big buttons should be, or what kind of layout you should have. And we don't have those strong feelings. We say do what works for the individual communicator. So you're going to see some very different styles. For example, this communicate vocabulary set, you've got some very bright colors here. You have a lot of different sort of categories. There's definitely multiple levels to them, so you can drill down. These vocabulary sets are 6 or 7 levels deep before you get to the end. So this is one of the vocabulary sets that's available. There's a template created by Practical, which is just a single page that you can start from and expand as you go. There's a category-based example, sort of a more traditional example that some people really like to start with. Just got some categories for things like verbs and pronouns and short words. You can do what works for the individual communicator based on where they're at. And because it's so easy to build these on a computer, we actually have a lot of people who will say, well, I'll just migrate what's already built inside of this other system into CoughDrop. And you can very quickly do that. One of the utilities that's really nice for when you're creating new boards, I showed you how you can create a board set that's whatever size you want. If you go into more options, there's this thing called labels. You can paste just a list of words. So if you have a list of words, or if you just want to type them, so let's say these are hat, cat. This is our at board, right? Hat, cat, splat, rat, gnat, at. Right, so let's say that these are all the words that we wanted to put on this board for whatever reason. And then I can say, let's go ahead and populate them. Let's do it in columns left to right, or let's do it in rows. So this will populate all along the top and then go to the next row as needed. So I can just type in all of those words. And then when I hit create, it'll make the board, it'll automatically grab any images it can find, and it'll pull those all in automatically. So it makes it really fast to be able to start building boards inside of CoughDrop. In addition, when you're on a computer screen, you can always use your keyboard. So you can just hit tab and jump to the next board. So it actually makes it really easy either way to be able to build up boards with a vocabulary set very quickly. And then you can go back and sort of massage the information and tweak it as you go. But this makes it very simple to get started and to build out a good vocabulary if you're migrating from an existing system, which a lot of people are. Let's see if there are any questions here. Okay, so there was a question around text. Somebody said on my son's boards, the text is below the images. So inside of CoughDrop, there's there's things you program on on the boards, and there's user preferences. And in some other systems, all of those options are things you program on boards. So on the board, you would specify if the text goes above or below the pictures, and what font to use, and things like that. In CoughDrop, we consider those to be user preferences. That way, people can use the same board set, and they can customize it without having to go reprogram everything by hand and manually tweak stuff. So inside of CoughDrop, if you go to Preferences, there's a lot of options here that will affect how boards show up for the individual communicator. There's options here for turning on logging and what happens when you hit buttons. So I can say, speak every time I hit a button, a speech button, or if I turn that off, then it will actually only speak when I hit the top window. So you can build up your sentences without having it speak along the way. You can have it speak when you hit on folders. By default, it won't speak when you hit on folders. It'll only speak when you hit on buttons that that aren't linked to anything else. You can have it not speak when you're spelling until the word is completely spelled. Either way, you can say when I hit a button, or when I hit the utterance window, which is the sentence window at the top, automatically clear it so that it'll be ready for the next sentence. And it doesn't actually. I'll show you what it does, because it doesn't actually completely clear it. So let's say, for example, that I said oops. I want to eat meat. So when I hit I want to eat meat, you'll notice it went grayed out up here. That means that if I now hit anywhere else on the screen, it will clear that and start over. I can still hit it as many times as I want to. So if I need to reiterate, I can do that as much as I need to. And if I hit backspace, it will unclear it so then I can keep going. So if I accidentally stop too soon, I can still keep going. But if I hit it and it's grayed out and I hit something else, now we're going to start over. So that's a user preference whether that happens or not. You can change that setting per communicator, so you can decide what works well for them. You can specify for each communicator. The original style that we had was that folders would have a little folder icon on it. What we do now is these colored corners. So you can specify if you want the old-fashioned folder icons or if you want the colored corners. You can specify whether the background image on buttons is white or clear. By default, it'll be clear, so it'll just be whatever color the button is. But sometimes that's not enough of a contrast for some communicators. So you can change that to be a white background instead, and then it will help draw out the image more. You can change whether the screen is black or white in the background. Sometimes a white background for the whole screen can be a little bit visually overwhelming for some communicators, especially since it's on all the time right in front of their face. And then there's some selection options, so you can say select based on where I lift my finger or where I start clicking. You can say whether you have to hold down the button in order to select, things like that. There's some great resources around core vocabulary and tracking modeling, which we've talked about a little bit in the last session, so I'm not going to go there. There's also a sidebar inside of CoughDrop. This is kind of it's like a quick reference place. And you can always get to it unless you turn it off. So you can it's sort of a jumping off point. You can have some resources here. So for example, by default, there's a beep. So if you need to get somebody's attention, you can just beep. It'll link to the keyboard and an inflections page and a quick yes or no. But if there's somewhere else that you find that you really like that you want to have on your sidebar, you can just hit more and say add to sidebar. And then you specify whose sidebar it'll be added to, what it will look like on their sidebar, and then it just is automatically added. And that gives them quick access to things which maybe they're not going to use on a regular basis. Maybe it doesn't belong in their core vocabulary, but contextually it could be a valuable thing for them to be able to jump off to at times. There's actually some really interesting stuff around GPS that you can do with that sidebar too, but I'm not going to talk about that right now. You can change in your settings, you can change how big the window is at the top. So when, oh, I duplicated myself here. So this sentence window at the top, you can specify whether it's small, medium, or large. You can have some spacing between the buttons. So if you need a gutter in between for easier access and accommodations, you can change the size of the borders. You can change the size of the text. So if you want large or small or medium text, you can change whether the text is above or below the images, or if you're just going to do text only or images only, if that makes sense for the individual. You can also specify a different font. So you can have it all caps. You can have Comic Sans if that's your thing. We have a dyslexic font, which basically has some weighted, the base of all the letters is weighted, which helps individuals with dyslexia to be able to more easily trace across the line for words when they're reading. So there's a couple different options for fonts and text that you can use to be able to create the layout and the styling that will work best for the communicator. When you first log in, a lot of these options, by the way, you go to preferences in order to tweak them all. But a lot of these options, when you first sign up for CoughDrop, you'll be taken to a setup wizard, which will walk you through some of this all on its own. So it'll say, thanks for signing up for CoughDrop. This is a little bit about what AAC is. This is why we try to personalize things. It talks a little bit about core vocabulary and why that's important. And then you can change some of these options, like whether the text goes above or below the images, whether you have a white background or not. You can specify whether you're using touch or clicking for access, or if you're using scanning with or without auditory prompts, or if you're using eye tracking as your access method. So you can change that to whatever makes sense for the individual, and then you can browse through, like I was saying, some of the vocabulary sets that are available. There's this quick core vocabulary set, which has different sizes. There's some cause and effect boards. So sometimes if you're starting with an individual, having just some sound effect boards can be nice, or having some video boards just to launch things and sort of get the idea that I can hit buttons and something will happen. Or there's a joke board, which you can use just to have some fun and make things a little interesting. There's some simple starters, so if you want to build your own thing, there's some simple ways to get started. This is where some of those functional examples, like the communicate boards that I showed you, are, or the hospital rehab. There's a phrase-based example if you've got an adult with aphasia, and there's also some keyboards, just the regular keyboard, and then also an extended keyboard, which has some quick core words, and then also some spots for quick phrases that the individual might want to use. So you can use this setup wizard to get started, to pick a voice and basically set up the baseline for what you're going to be using for the communicator and for their account. But all of those settings were all available after the fact in that preferences view as well. So whichever way makes the most sense, whichever way is easiest for you to set it up, feel free to do it the way that works for you. It's kind of like the mantra of CoughDrop: do the way that works for you, and we'll try to accommodate it. So those are the points I wanted to make sure and bring up. I wanted to hit on, programming from a computer. Again, as you make these changes, so the way it works, you program it on whatever device you're on and you hit save. And then the communicator's device, whenever it gets internet access, it can download those changes. If anybody has questions, by the way, feel free to start typing them. I'm just gonna explain this while I go, but feel free to ask any questions and I'll answer them here in just a minute. So as the communicator is using the device, they don't have to have internet all the time. It's not like you need constant internet in order to use CoughDrop. If the Wi-Fi is turned off, it'll still work just fine, because what the app does is it downloads the images and the buttons and everything that it needs to be able to work offline. And it tracks all of the logs and reports and everything automatically if you turn it on. And so then the next time that device gets internet, it'll say, hey, is there anything I need to do? And the cloud can say, yes, the therapist made these changes and the parent made these changes, and you need to download and update. And then the device can download and update, and it says, well, here's some logs that happened, and it pushes those up. And then the whole team can see reports on the data that's been used and what that looks like. And it doesn't have to be constantly connected, but every time that gets internet connection, it's going to download all those changes and updates, which makes it really nice because the team doesn't have to be in sync as far as time-wise. You can make changes on the schedule that works for you. And if the communicator's riding home on the bus, that's fine. You go in and you program and hit save. And then when they get home and they get internet again, they'll download those changes and they'll get the updates. And they'll be good to go. And if the family makes a couple tweaks, they don't have to worry about, let's make sure we're doing it at the right time. They just make the changes, and then the next time the device gets updates, they'll have it. And they don't have to worry about saying, oh, we should probably tell the speech path what we did, because notifications are automatically sent out. So everybody has access, and everybody knows what changes are going on and what that looks like over time. So there's a lot of value that you get just as far as time savings in being able to program it remotely. Both because computers are just a lot easier to program on than tablets, and also because as you work on it, you can do it on your own schedule and your own timeline, You don't have to wait until you're physically in the room. I would talk to so many speech therapists who would say, you know, I spend 15 minutes of each session programming boards because we have new words we want to add or we want to tweak things, and the only time I can do it is when I'm right there with the communicator and their device. With CoughDrop, you don't have to do it that way at all. You just make a note of what you're going to tweak, and then after the family's left or after the individual is left, you can make the changes on your own schedule, your own timeline, and you can use the therapy time for something that's a little more productive than programming. All right, let's see. A couple more questions. Somebody asked, if you use the keyboard in the middle of a sentence, will the word appear in the sentence window within the sentence? Yes. So I'll go ahead and show you what that looks like. So let's say, we say, I want to
drop. Jazz.
This isn't going to show up in our text position.
Jazzy.
Text position, but that's
Jazzer.
okay.
Jazzercise. Jazzercise.
I want to jazzercise.
Jazzercise.
And let's do...
Now. I want to jazzercise now.
So you can definitely do inline keyboard phrases and it'll work just fine. It'll do text prediction as well as they're using it. Let's see, there's another question. Somebody said, can you talk about requested phrases? So this is a new feature that's partly implemented in CoughDrop, but we're going to keep working on it. It's basically the idea that family members or support staff could say, you know what, we need this new word or we need to add something to the system, but I don't feel comfortable deciding where to add it. They can then specify, they can say, I want to add this, let's make sure we get it added. And then the therapist or whoever can then jump in and very quickly use those words in the setting that maybe makes the most sense. So let me just show you an example real quick. No, let's not use this one. Let me use a different one. This is the one we were on. So inside of CoughDrop, when you're editing, there's this option that says ideas. And this is a system that can help give you ideas of things that maybe you need to add to the communicator's vocabulary set. So for example, if we look at my daughter's vocabulary set, we can pull up and we can say, these are the core words that she doesn't have access to. Maybe we're okay with that, maybe we're not, but we can very quickly see based on the core vocabulary we've set for her, these are words that she's missing. And we could, if we wanted to, we could just say, all right, let's go ahead and start adding these. And it'll drop them in onto the board set. We can also look at fringe, so if there's some fringe vocabulary that we want to make sure we're not missing out on, we can look at those and see what's in there and what's not. We can look at the phrases that we've actually recorded already, if there are audio recordings. And this is where we would be able to also see requested phrases. So if a family member had said, I want to make sure we add these words, then the therapist or whoever's editing can really quickly see, oh, here's where those are, and I can just drop them in and make sure they're added where it makes the most sense. There's also this extras tool, which lets you search for Tar Heel reader books. So let's see. It seemed like their website might have been having a little bit of issues, so I'm not sure if this is going to work right now. But you could very quickly, you could drop in images and phrases from Tar Heel reader books. So if, for example, you're working on some curriculum or you're doing some assessment based on Tar Heel reader books, which I know a lot of schools and programs do, it saves you time in being able to just drop those in onto the buttons instead of having to manually copy and paste images and move them around. So that's that ideas feature inside of CoughDrop. It's only turned on for some users right now because it's still in beta. We're still testing it, so don't be sad if you don't see it, but we are working on it. Are there any other questions that anyone would like to have answered before we wrap up? I showed the last group, but one other new feature that we have is when you're looking at boards inside of CoughDrop, if you hover over buttons, so if you find a button you really like and you want to use it somewhere else, maybe on somebody else's board they've created one, you can just hit this copy to button stash and then it will stash it. And then when you go to another board that you're working on, you can just go to the button stash and it'll be right there and you can say, oh yeah, I want to put that right here. So you can reuse buttons that you like that other people have created. You can also, if you hit word data, it will show you a little bit of information about the button. So you'll have a picture which you can copy and paste into other tools like a Word document if you're printing out some resources and things like that. And then also some suggestions for sentences or examples of how you could use this word or this phrase in context. And so it's some suggestions for modeling, basically, of ways that you could better model. Okay. I think that's about it as far as questions go. I will be on the Slack channel if anybody has any more questions that they would like to add. Hopefully this was useful for you. You can watch it after the fact. Some of this I went a little quickly on, so you can always watch it again later if you want to. If you're ever stumped inside a CoughDrop, you just go to the main page and hit support. And there's an FAQ which has a bunch of things, how do I create a board? How do I link to other boards? Things like that. And there's YouTube walkthroughs for a lot of those as well. Or you can always just shoot us a message and say, help, I don't know how to do this. Can I even do this inside a CoughDrop? And we will definitely help figure it out. We love getting feedback from people. When people say, I wish this was easier. I wish this was more effective. That's our bread and butter, because we want to make this as approachable and intuitive as we can. And the only way we can do that is if we keep hearing from people and keep getting feedback and perspective. So please don't hesitate to let us know if you have thoughts for how we could improve. We would love to hear it. We appreciate all the support we've received so far. A lot of the features you saw today are things that other people have suggested, and we want to keep that trend going just because it makes everyone's lives so much easier. So thanks again for your time. I appreciate everybody. I appreciate the questions and the viewership. I will wrap it up now with one last limerick. There was an old man of Quebec, a beetle ran over his neck, but he cried, with a needle I'll slay you, O beetle, that angry old man of Quebec. And there you go. Thanks again. Appreciate your time.